The gift was wrapped in pink ribbons. My daughter was 7. And I should have known the moment I saw my sister's smile that something was wrong with it. My name is Celeste Harmon, and I built my life the hard way. Grew up in a 2-bedroom house in Columbus, Ohio, where my mother stretched one paycheck across 5 mouths and called it abundance. I watched her do it with quiet dignity, and I promised myself I'd never make her carry that weight alone once I was grown. I kept that promise. By 34, I was a senior marketing director at a firm downtown, owned a 4-bedroom colonial in Westerville, drove a car that didn't shake on the highway, and most importantly, I was present for my daughter Mia in every way my own childhood lacked. My sister Danielle was 31 and still finding herself. I never judged her for it. I paid her rent twice, covered her car note once, sent money home to Mom every month without being asked, because that's what love looked like to me. Quiet, consistent, unconditional. But love, I've learned, can be a blindfold. Mia's 7th birthday party was a Sunday afternoon in September. Balloons, laughter, buttercream cake. Danielle arrived last, holding a gift wrapped in pink ribbons and wearing a smile I'd never quite seen on her face before. Warm on the surface, hollow underneath. I didn't name it then. I should have. Mia tore through the wrapping paper the way 7-year-olds do, without ceremony, without suspicion. The rest of us watched. I was the only one who should have been paying closer attention. The gift was a tablet. Not a toy tablet, a real one. Latest model. Retail price sitting somewhere around $400. I knew because I'd been debating buying Mia that exact model for Christmas and kept talking myself out of it, thinking she was still too young. Danielle knew that. I'd told her during one of our Sunday phone calls, the kind where I did most of the talking and she did most of the listening. Or so I thought. Mia squealed and hugged Danielle, like she'd hung the moon. My mother clapped from her lawn chair, beaming. My husband Marcus smiled politely and reached for another slice of cake. I smiled too. Genuinely, at first. But something tugged at the back of my mind. Quiet and persistent, like a loose thread you notice but don't pull. Danielle was 3 months behind on rent. I knew because I'd covered it. She'd called me crying, said her hours got cut, said she was barely keeping her head above water. So where did $400 come from? I told myself not to question a generous gesture. Told myself I was being uncharitable, ungrateful, even. That night, after the guests left and Mia fell asleep clutching her new tablet, I carried the wrapping paper to the trash, and something small slipped out from inside the folds. A folded receipt, and a name on it that wasn't Danielle's. I stood in my kitchen at 10:47 at night, holding a receipt under the overhead light like it was evidence at a crime scene. Because that's exactly what it was. The name on the receipt was Marcus, my husband. I read it 3 times. Then a 4th. My brain kept trying to offer me reasonable explanations. Maybe he'd helped Danielle pick it out. Maybe he'd fronted her the money as a surprise. Maybe there was some completely innocent coordination happening between my husband and my sister that I simply wasn't aware of. I was good at that. Building exits for other people's behavior. I folded the receipt and slid it into the back pocket of my jeans. Walked upstairs. Stood in the doorway of our bedroom and watched Marcus sleeping, one arm thrown over his side of the bed, breathing slow and unbothered. The face of a man with nothing to hide. Or the face of a man who'd been hiding things so long, he'd forgotten what exposure felt like. I didn't wake him. I didn't confront anyone. Instead, I went back downstairs, poured myself 2 fingers of bourbon I rarely touched, and sat at my kitchen island in the dark. I thought about the way Danielle had watched Mia open that gift. Not with the excitement of a generous aunt. With something else entirely. Eyes sliding sideways toward Marcus for just a half second. I hadn't registered it then. I registered it now. The question wasn't just where the money came from. The question was how long had this been happening, and what exactly was this? I didn't sleep. Not a real sleep. Just that shallow, torturous kind where your body lies still but your mind runs laps around every memory you thought you understood. I started going back. 6 months. 8 months. A year. Replaying moments I'd filed away as ordinary, now holding each one up to this new, terrible light. The way Marcus had offered to drive Danielle home from Christmas dinner last year, alone, while I stayed behind helping Mom with dishes, assuming it was just him being considerate. The weekend he said he had a work conference in Cincinnati. I'd been buried in a campaign launch, barely looked up from my laptop when he kissed me goodbye. Danielle had mentioned that same weekend she was visiting a friend downstate. I'd never connected those two sentences until right now. The way she'd started texting him directly, little things, asking about car recommendations, a playlist he'd mentioned. I'd seen those exchanges and felt nothing. Why would I?
He was her brother-in-law.
Familiarity was natural. Except I was remembering the texture of those moments differently now. The slight pause before Marcus answered her texts when I was in the room. The way Danielle stopped complaining about being lonely around the same time Marcus started coming home 20 minutes later than usual. Small things. Individually meaningless. Together, a map. I pulled out my phone and opened the joint account we used for household expenses. Scrolled back 4 months through transactions I'd trusted without reading. 3 withdrawals.
Cash.
$200 each. Every single one on a weekend I'd worked late. My bourbon glass was empty. My chest felt like concrete. There's a particular kind of grief that comes not from losing someone, but from realizing who they actually were. That grief doesn't announce itself. It just quietly dismantles everything you thought was solid. I gave myself exactly 48 hours. Not to fall apart, to get organized. Because I'd spent my entire adult life solving problems with clarity and precision, and I wasn't about to let betrayal turn me into someone I didn't recognize. I called my friend Renee, a family attorney I'd met through work 3 years ago. Told her I needed a private consultation. She didn't ask questions over the phone, just said Tuesday at noon and texted me her office address. Then I contacted a private investigator named Gary Whitfield, recommended through a colleague who'd gone through a quiet, ugly divorce 2 years prior. Gary was expensive, discreet, and, according to my colleague, completely emotionless in the best possible way. I needed emotionless right now. I told neither Marcus nor Danielle anything. I went about my week with surgical normalcy, cooking dinner, answering emails, laughing at Mia's knock-knock jokes, kissing Marcus goodnight like my skin wasn't crawling. The performance of my life. Literally. What I didn't tell anyone was what Gary found within 72 hours. Not just confirmation of what I already suspected, but something so much worse. Something that reframed not just the last few months, but the last 3 years of my marriage and every vulnerable, trusting conversation I'd ever had with my sister. He sent me a single photograph first, then the document. I sat in my parked car outside Mia's school and opened it. My hands didn't shake. My eyes didn't water. I simply went completely, terrifyingly still. The photograph was taken outside an apartment building I'd never seen. Marcus's hand on the small of Danielle's back, her head tilted toward his shoulder. The timestamp read 14 months ago. 14 months. Mia had just turned 6. I'd been working 70-hour weeks trying to close the biggest account of my career. I'd come home exhausted every night to a husband who rubbed my shoulders and told me I was incredible. While visiting my sister on weekends I knew nothing about. The document Gary sent was a lease agreement. A studio apartment in Grandview Heights, 12 months, signed jointly under both their names. Expired 8 months ago, which meant they'd been careful enough to let it go before I got close to anything. But careful people still leave receipts in birthday wrapping paper. I sat with that information for 3 days. Let it move through me like something toxic that needed to pass completely before I could think straight. Then I got to work. I met with Renee and laid everything on the table. The withdrawals, the lease, the photograph, the timeline. She looked at me with steady, professional eyes and said I had an exceptionally strong case for both divorce proceedings and asset protection. I instructed her to begin quietly. Nothing filed yet. Nothing visible. Because Marcus didn't know what I knew. And Danielle didn't know what I knew. And my greatest advantage, the only one that mattered, was that they both still believed I was exactly who I'd always been to them.
Trusting.
Generous.
Blind.
I invited the entire family to dinner the following Saturday. Mom, Marcus, Danielle.
Mia.
I cooked everything from scratch, set the table beautifully, and smiled like a woman with absolutely nothing on her mind. There's a difference between revenge and justice. Revenge is emotional. Justice is architectural. I'd spent 2 weeks building something neither of them could dismantle, appeal, or escape. Dinner was warm and unhurried. Mom talked about her garden. Mia performed an entire comedy routine involving a rubber chicken she'd gotten at school. Marcus poured wine and laughed at all the right moments. Danielle complimented my roasted chicken twice and asked for the recipe, like we were still the sisters we'd pretended to be. I gave it to her, smiled, and gave it to her. After dessert, I asked Mom to take Mia upstairs to pick out a bedtime story. Mom read the room the way only mothers can, said nothing, just gathered Mia gently and disappeared up the staircase. The three of us sat at the table. I reached into the folder I'd kept on the kitchen counter all evening, unremarkable, just sitting there, and placed 3 items on the table with the quiet precision of someone who had rehearsed nothing because they needed to rehearse nothing. The photograph, the lease agreement, bank statements with every withdrawal highlighted in yellow. Neither of them spoke. Marcus reached for the photograph first.
His jaw tightened.
Danielle's face dissolved from confusion into something that looked almost like relief, like a secret finally exhaled after being held too long. That reaction told me everything I needed to know about her remorse. There wasn't any. I looked at them both and said, with complete calm, "Renee filed this morning. The house is mine. I had Marcus sign a post-nuptial 18 months ago that he clearly forgot about. The joint accounts are frozen. And Danielle." I turned to my sister. "Mom knows. I told her before you arrived." The sound Danielle made wasn't crying. It was collapse. Justice doesn't roar. I learned that at my own dinner table, watching 2 people unravel in complete silence while my daughter laughed at a bedtime story 1 floor above us. Marcus left that night with an overnight bag and the specific, hollow dignity of a man who understood he'd already lost. He didn't beg. I think some part of him was relieved too, relieved that the exhausting architecture of deception had finally given way. We talked through attorneys from that point forward.
Clean. Documented.
Finished. Danielle tried to speak 3 times before anything coherent came out. She said she was sorry, that it had meant nothing, that she loved me. I believed exactly none of it, not because I was bitter, but because I'd watched her face when she handed Mia that gift. That sideways glance toward Marcus. That hollow smile. A woman genuinely sorry doesn't perform generosity at the scene of her own crime. I told her calmly that I loved her the way you love someone you're grieving. Past tense dressed in present clothing. Then I asked her to leave. Mom stayed. Washed every dish without being asked, moving through my kitchen with the quiet grief of a woman processing the fact that one daughter had burned the other down slowly, over 14 months, inside a family she'd sacrificed everything to hold together. Before she left, Mom held my face in both hands and said nothing. Just looked at me. That was enough. That was everything. In the months that followed, I was renegotiated my contract, received a promotion, and bought out Marcus's share of the Colonial without blinking. Mia still doesn't know the full truth. She knows Daddy lives somewhere else now. She knows Annie Danielle, and I need space. Children understand distance even when they can't name it. I rebuilt quietly, the same way I'd built everything, without applause, without audience, without anyone's permission. Some mornings I stand in my kitchen with coffee and look out at the backyard where Mia's swing set catches the early light, and I feel something I didn't expect to feel on the other side of all this. Not anger, not satisfaction.
Peace.
The kind you can only earn by refusing to become what was done to you. Celeste Harmon, 35 years old, still standing.